The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome everyone to this month's Alcor webinar, Optimizing Your Cloud Spend. We will begin in just a few minutes. Alcor is pleased to welcome you all for today's webinar. Alcor is a global cloud advisory and implementation services company serving Fortune 500, government agencies, and other leading organizations in multiple industry verticals across Americas, Canada, India, Great Britain, and Japan. Alcor is an experienced ServiceNow elite partner. We also partner with leading technology companies, including AWS, Oracle, Microsoft, FireEye, Incorta, 3C Logic, Solonis, OneTrust, and others. We advise leading businesses on cloud platforms, architecture, enterprise service management, and integrating IT service delivery. We also provide business process consulting to capture, re-engineer, and improve processes that can be easily automated. The Alcor consulting team has excellence in business strategy, cloud technology, and organizational change management. Our ongoing webinar series is designed to inform, enlighten, and start discussions within your own organizations. If you require any additional information after listening to today's webinar, please reach out to us through our website, www.alcortech.com. We have some time reserved at the end of the webinar for Q&A, so please feel free to type any questions into the questions section of the webinar dashboard. Today's webinar topic is Optimizing Your Cloud Spend, presented by John Van Ommen. John is Solution Architect at Alcor Solutions. He's AWS Certified Solution Architect who worked on cloud implementation projects for two of the world's largest banks and has been working in DevOps space for over a decade. I will now turn the webinar over to John.
Thank you for the introduction. I'm excited to get into the material today. As noted a moment ago, Alcor is a ServiceNow partner. We've also been doing quite a bit of work with the cloud, with AWS, with Azure, with hybrid cloud. The idea behind this presentation is to distill some of the things that we've been discussing with our customers. We frequently see a pattern of the same things happening with our customers, in particular, that the typical customer is excited about going into the cloud to save money, to streamline their operations. But one of the challenges that many customers face is that the costs can be unexpectedly high. I think that there's, in general, out in the market, there's a lot of people who think, oh, I'm just going to take all my physical servers, I'm going to migrate them into AWS, and I'm going to save a pile of money. And that's not always the case. We've learned a lot from numerous implementations, and we've also worked with some great software partners, such as Embotix and Morpheus, to streamline the process of migration into cloud and to also make it as affordable as possible. Here's a short list of some of the customers and partners that we've had. We've been keeping quite busy lately with this, as you can see. About me, I am a AWS Certified Solution Architect. I am also Red Hat and ServiceNow certified. I've been working in the DevOps space for over a decade. I've done cloud implementation and migration projects for a number of financial companies, a couple of the biggest banks in the world. I hold a patent for cloud technology that I received with a former employer. So here's today's agenda. We're going to get into a discussion of the cost of running services in the cloud, how to optimize that, a little bit of a bird's eye view of some more advanced topics such as going cloud native, and then of course we'll discuss how we can help you. Here's some information from Gartner. As we all know, a lot of enterprise customers are going into the cloud. The growth of AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud is just like nothing we've ever seen. You know, we heard rumblings about cloud 15, 20 years ago, but it's picked up steam in a tremendous way, particularly beginning about 10 years ago, and it just doesn't seem to stop anytime. AWS is coming out with new technologies and new products constantly. Here's a little bit more of a deep dive into the actual numbers, kind of giving you some information on the growth of the market. Again, this is just not going to abate anytime soon. What I'm seeing with our customers is that despite the maturity of the cloud, I still see a lot of customers who have nothing in a public cloud whatsoever. They're still trying to figure out how do they take their on-premises servers, how do they move them up into AWS, how do they move them up into Azure, and a lot of confusion on what the costs are going to be, what the advantages of going to the cloud are, what some of the drawbacks are. Now that's a pretty broad topic, and you can definitely contact us to get into some of the other finer points of cloud migration. Today, we're mostly going to focus on cost savings. Failing to plan is planning to fail. I think that I think that probably my number one takeaway from working on numerous projects in the cloud is that a lack of planning can cause incredible cost overruns. It can cause projects to take much longer than they normally would. In some really terrible scenarios, you can even expose your customer data. You can put your company at risk by not planning properly. So there's a number of different ways to gather metrics. AWS in particular has a pretty rich set of features that allow you to gather data on your cloud services. And it's really critical to include this in your plan. Another great thing about AWS is that they've done a really great job of laying out what are the best practices. This is something that I've consistently seen from AWS, is that they don't just focus on how do you move your enterprise into the cloud. AWS really focuses on what's the best way to move your enterprise into the cloud. And this gives customers an opportunity to design their infrastructure properly, design it securely, design it for maximum performance, design it for maximum availability. All of these are critical, and I think that, again, I know I sort of sound like a broken record here, but I cannot stress enough how important it is to plan your migration properly, to consider the costs, consider the security, and most importantly, work with an expert. What I've seen with a lot of customers is they just, they sign up for an account with AWS and they start spinning up some servers. They don't really take into consideration some of the security implications in particular, or the cost implications. And then 6 months later, they're calling us up and saying, hey, my costs are just out of control, or hey, my server has been hacked. These are the kind of things that can be avoided with proper planning. So I'm going to get into a couple of examples of experiences that we've had to save customers money. We had one customer in particular who was storing a lot of video data. Now, a typical video file, a 1080p video file, that can be 5 or 10 gigabytes if it's compressed, but it's unbelievable how much space a video file can take up when it's uncompressed. So we had a particular project where a customer was storing these enormous video files, and it was for basically, they were a school and they needed to work with this data, but they were doing it on premises, and they were using enterprise storage. So from their perspective, you can see why they used enterprise storage. They want high availability, they want reliability, and enterprise storage delivers that. But enterprise storage is incredibly expensive, and a lot of that is because enterprise storage is designed for high performance. And if you can see in this particular example that I just gave, the level of performance was actually unnecessary, because it's not like they're a public-facing website. It's not like they're doing, high-performance computing or something like that. They're just storing really big video files that are accessed very occasionally. So, working with them, we were able to give them a great deal of storage with lower performance and much lower cost. Just to give you some examples of how inexpensive storage can be. A terabyte of storage in Amazon S3 is $26 in the Northern California region. It's $23 in Oregon. Now, this brings up probably the what I would call the low-hanging fruit. The easiest way for a customer to reduce their spending is just to select their region carefully. What I've consistently seen is that customers will come to us and they'll have a presence in Amazon. They'll be unhappy with their spending. I'll take a look at their setup, and they've often put servers into the region that's closest to their office. Now, there's some valid reasons to do that. For instance, if you have an office in Southern California and you need very low latency to your servers, you might put them in the Northern California AWS region. But that's going to cost you a little bit more than 10% extra, just putting the servers in Northern California. And the reason for that is that data centers, they take up a lot of space. The real estate is not cheap in California. And more importantly, electricity is expensive in California. So something as basic as simply moving your storage from California to the Oregon region can just overnight lower your costs. Of course, one of the tricky things is that once you've already established an enterprise in AWS, it's not as simple as just clicking a button to move things around. You do have to consider how your VPCs are set up, how your services are set up, where your instances live, how you're going to migrate them, whether your quality of service is going to be impacted by that. But these are just the bread and butter for us. We've done this 100 times. It's not a walk in the park, but it's a very again, low-hanging fruit. It's a way to save money quite quickly. Another very simple way to save money with AWS is based on Moore's Law. So all of us are familiar with Moore's Law. In Moore's Law, basically every year, computing power gets cheaper and faster. All of us have experienced this. I'm sure you've had a laptop that was 3 years old. You went out, bought yourself a new laptop. The new laptop was faster, lighter, sometimes even cheaper, just better overall. So you can do the exact same thing with AWS. You can move from older instance types to newer instance types, and the newer instance types aren't just faster, they're cheaper. Put these two things together, it's possible to reduce your spending by as much as 25, even 30%, just by optimizing the region and moving to the latest hardware. Some other kind of cool things that come with the newer hardware. The network performance is often improved. This is something that we've really seen with computing at scale, is that the network performance can become a bottleneck very quickly, particularly when you're using network attached storage. So anything that you can do to improve the network performance almost always yields benefits. Another thing is that the newer instance types will sometimes be more stable. We saw this with some high performance computing work that we did, that a particular customer was having problems with instability. Basically, they'd have an application that was running for hours and hours and hours, and then it would fail. Oftentimes the failures were due to the network, not Amazon's network specifically, but basically the instances that they had were very cutting edge and very high performance, and because of this, the drivers were kind of flaky. But again, this was on an older instance type. Also, I apologize for the pause. I occasionally am taking a sip of water to make sure my voice sticks around. Another thing that I'm really proud of that we do at Alcor, and I think this is one of the ways that we really differentiate ourselves from the competition, is that we are agnostic about what kind of software you want to run. For instance, if you went to AWS and you said, I want to put my VMs up in AWS, I want to put my storage up there, I want to do automation. AWS is generally going to be pointing you towards CloudFormation because, of course, that's their automation software. But we're agnostic about these things. So, for instance, we had a customer recently who also was storing image data. This particular customer, they're a medical company, and so it was medical imaging. And so with this customer, again, spending a lot of money on storage, needed decently high performance for the network, but they wanted to automate a lot of these processes. And because Alcor, again, software agnostic, they wanted to work with a particular piece of software that's not offered by AWS. I guess I could just say it's Morpheus. They wanted to work with Morpheus. And so we were able to do that. Now, you're not going to get the same kind of reaction if you're working with AWS or if you're working with Azure directly. They want you to work with their software stack. And here's some just overall ways to optimize your costs. And of course, no-brainer, turning off the instances. Of course, that has implications as well. Using auto-scaling, that's a great one. Evaluating your architecture, that's another really good one as well. Another thing I see quite a bit is that customers will have instances that are larger than necessary. We work with a lot of partners so that we can provide software and services that can optimize your spending. And Botics is a popular one. Again, we've done some work with Morpheus. We can also work with the AWS tools themselves. But again, kind of harkening back to an earlier part of the presentation, it's all about planning. If you are not actively collecting this data, you can find yourself in a situation where you get humongous Amazon bills and you just have no real idea why. Keep in mind that one of the difficult things about AWS is that you're paying for an instance whether it's doing anything or not. So for instance, a pretty typical T3A extra large VM, that's 0.1786 cents per hour. Doesn't sound like much, it's a fraction of a dollar. Has 4 CPUs and 16 gigabytes of RAM. Over a year, that one instance costs $1,564. So if you have 1,000 instances or 10,000 instances, that can get expensive quickly. And definitely the ability to minimize the footprint of those instances can make a huge difference. For instance, I've seen customers who were using fairly beefy instances just for hosting software when there's 100 different ways to do that, and many of them are much less expensive than, for instance, using a 4-core or an 8-core VM for hosting Git. And in this slide, I touched a little bit on hybrid cloud. Hybrid cloud is probably pretty, if not the number one thing, but pretty close to the number one thing that a lot of our customers are asking us about. And I think the reason for this, again, kind of goes back to the mindset of AWS and Azure. If you're working with AWS directly, you're really going to be focused on getting all of your enterprise into the cloud. We, again, are agnostic about this. If you want to keep some of your services on premises, we can help you do that. We have some great experience with cloud management platforms, which allow you to bridge that. And there are There are so many hybrid cloud products out there. It's a really crowded space. I think that we are well versed in the pros and cons of just about all of them. So we are able to look at your situation and evaluate. An example of this, in my opinion, is that CloudForms is a pretty capable product, but it's pretty complex, and its complexity does not become obvious at first glance. Basically, working with the state machines and writing Ruby code for it, it's unexpectedly complex. So there are some customers who may be better suited with Embotics or with Morpheus. It just depends on a customer by customer, case by case basis. Going cloud native is probably the hottest thing right now. I think almost every one of our customers is interested in going cloud native. But first, let's talk about what is cloud native. So this is going to depend on who you ask, but here's my perception of cloud native. We had a particular customer who was running these jobs where they were doing a lot of number crunching a lot of data. They were doing this, and then they were turning the machines off. So basically, they'd spin up a bunch of machines using some Ansible playbooks. They'd have the machines do some work. After the work was completed, they'd save the results of that work and then spin the machines down. So in this scenario, we were able to utilize Ansible automation to ensure that these systems aren't running 24/7. These particular systems were some of the most expensive, most powerful hardware you can get from any cloud provider. They had like 96 CPUs. They were the Xeon Silver CPUs. Not an inexpensive piece of hardware. We were running on bare metal to maximize performance, because when you run in a virtual machine, you lose a little bit of performance to the hypervisor. But so with this particular customer, again, Ansible automation was able to simplify this, lower their costs. The critical thing, the critical takeaway here is that that customer did not want to have these expensive systems running 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. So I think the fundamental idea behind going cloud native is figuring out, how do we modify the way that we do business so that we're not running VMs, we're not running servers 24/7. So let's see. Cloud native applications are a collection of small, independent, and loosely coupled services. I think that's pretty accurate. Some other examples of our customers going cloud native. We have one customer in particular. I thought this was really clever. They figured out there's not a really good reason to host websites on VMs in AWS. The way that they saw it, they could put the content in Amazon S3, and then they could have a serverless website. So basically, they're leveraging the fact that S3 storage is incredibly inexpensive. To give you some idea of how cheap it is, a terabyte of storage in S3 is just $23. Is $23 a year in Oregon. So that, I mean, I'm not saying that storage is free in Amazon, but it's really inexpensive. So if you look at the conventional way that a customer would host something like that, it'd typically be living on a virtual machine. That virtual machine would have some storage attached to it. you'd have an application running, you'd have to have some people who are responsible for making sure that the application works, make sure that the virtual machine doesn't fall over. It's a lot of additional complexity. And going cloud native for that customer definitely saved them money and saved them a lot of support headaches. Of course, the big challenge with every customer that I've worked with trying to go cloud native is that you have to, in a lot of cases, redesign your application stack. So if you're greenfield, if you're a small little company in Silicon Valley, it's often easier to go cloud native right out of the gate. Again, kind of goes back to the planning. As a customer, you may find that it's worth your time and worth the expense to design the applications to be cloud native from the get-go. But if you're not greenfield, if you're brownfield, things get more complex. An example of this, I worked with a big financial for about a year, and we were trying to figure out how do we get applications into a container, how do we migrate that, and it was tricky, especially bigger companies, more established companies. There's often a lot of bureaucracy. There's a lot of oversight that has to be addressed when it comes to going cloud native. It's a really complex topic, and I'd love to get into it further. This is, if you couldn't tell, I'm very passionate about all these topics, and if you would like to explore them further, I encourage you to reach out to me, or Alcor, of course. So as noted a moment ago, the primary advantage of going cloud native, though it is complex, is that you are no longer paying for a virtual machine that's running 24/7, 365 days a year. If you design your cloud native applications carefully, they will only be used for when they're needed. Again, the serverless website's a good example of this, where basically it instantiates to provide the data, but it's not just using up the VM 24/7. This slide touches on some of the security considerations. This is another kind of cool thing about going cloud native, is that you can leverage the scope of Amazon. So with that particular customer, we stuck CloudFront in front of their application, and by doing so, gave them the ability to lower the latency of the traffic to their customers. And this is pretty cool, because if you look at it 10 or 15 years ago, that kind of technology, you'd have to go to Akamai, you'd have to sign long-term contracts, you'd have to pay for a bunch of consulting hours. Here in 2019, you can do it pretty simply with CloudFront. So let's see. In summary, I think that there's a two-pronged approach here to lowering the costs. There is what I would call the low-hanging fruit, which is that you can choose your AWS region carefully. You can choose your systems, your VM class carefully. For instance, upgrading to newer and faster types, which are also cheaper. And most importantly, you can plan. You can evaluate, what do I have right now? How much is it being used? Do I really need this many instances? Do I need more? Is it secure? Do I care about latency? Do I care about storage performance? And if so, how much? What are my security considerations? All of these factor in to both the migration story and the cost optimization story. The other prong of the cost optimization route, as I see it, is going cloud native. Going cloud native is more complex. There are definitely hurdles, but if done carefully, going cloud native allows an enterprise to lower their support costs. It can improve the reliability of your services. It can lower your cost of doing business. It can make your enterprise services more secure. But again, you always have to plan this very carefully to ensure that you are getting all the benefits of going cloud native. Most importantly, we have years of experience doing this. We have a great deal of demand from our customers for this. And I did this presentation really to kind of get the word out there because it seems like we keep seeing the same challenges faced by our customers. And we've really put a lot of effort, a lot of time and expense into solving those challenges. We'd love to help you out. You're welcome to reach out to us. We have, again, expertise with cloud. We have expertise with ServiceNow. We have expertise with integrating the two together. We have a lot of experience integrating these, particularly with CMP products from Embotics and from ServiceNow. We also have an end of the year offer. As an AWS partner and ServiceNow Elite partner, we believe it's important to optimize the work of all platforms to deliver the best value on your digital transformation journey. This is why we'd like to extend to you our year-end offer. Sign up for a free in-depth cloud roadmap discussion and workshops with Alcor. Our cloud experts look forward to sharing Alcor expertise on what approaches you can take to build a scalable, best-of-breed, and cost-effective roadmap to building, migrating, and securing your cloud footprint. Alcor's technology expertise includes AWS, Azure, ServiceNow, Ansible, and various other CMP platforms. I think the key to this, and something I really want to stress here, is we have been doing integrations with AWS, integrations with Ansible, and integrations with ServiceNow that I haven't seen anywhere else in the industry. If you take a look at my LinkedIn, I've worked with a lot of great companies, and I think the takeaway that I've seen with a lot of software companies is that they want to work with a particular stack, but that's not Alcor. We just want to solve your problems. So give us a call. We'd love to work with you. We can work in the scope of the software that you're already using. We can also introduce you to some great new tools. Request your free roadmap discussion today and get one step closer to cloud transformation. Fine print. Offer is valid until January 15th, 2020. The amount of free workshops is limited to 2 4-hour sessions. Alcor reserves the right to refuse service to any person for any reason. That's just the legalese, guys. Questions?
Thank you so much, John, for delivering this great webinar. We do have a couple of questions at this moment, but I would like to take a second to remind everyone to please use the questions section to ask your questions on today's topic. Just to start our Q&A session, John, would you be able to address this question for us? When it comes to reducing cost in the cloud, what are the low-hanging fruit?
I think that the number one thing that I see with customers is that they often have servers that are running for no particular reason. They have servers where they haven't really put any thought into what region they're located in, and they're often using more power than necessary. Something I'll often see is I'll talk to a customer, I'll look at their setup in AWS and just realize that they have dozens, sometimes hundreds of servers where developers just spun up an instance, used it for a couple days, maybe did a demo, and then they just forgot about it. And nobody puts in the effort to, at the very least, turn them off, but ideally terminate them entirely. And it can get very expensive. Imagine if you have a sprawl of tens or even hundreds of servers that you're just paying for day in and day out for no good reason.
Awesome. Thank you so much for addressing this one. Just a reminder, you guys, if you have a question, please feel free to text it to us to the chat. Second question I have here for you, John. Can you tell me about a time when someone migrated to the cloud and things went poorly?
Yeah. The unfortunate truth is that, there have been some just disastrous cloud migration projects out there. I'm sorry to say. I think that, in my opinion, perhaps the best way that we are able to save customers money is to help them avoid these pitfalls. There's one I can think of in particular where there were dozens of people working on the project. There were hundreds of thousands of dollars invested in software, services, infrastructure, and there was just a fundamental lack of planning. And so with this particular migration project, it reached a point where we had engineers who were just basically stalled, who couldn't move forward. And the problem was simply that no one had planned this thing out properly. The appropriate stakeholders were not contacted. I think it's something that's all too frequent. And the reason that it happens, in my opinion, is that, if you're a big bank, or if you're a big retailer, you're really not in the business of cloud hosting and cloud migration and cloud optimization. Those are things that Alcor does. Because these companies don't have a sufficient level of experience with giant migration projects, they often stumble over the same small set of issues. And these things can be avoided so easily, but you just have to have the experience. It's just, this is our core competency. I mean, this is literally what we do day in and day out. And by working with us, we can help you avoid these pitfalls. And I mean, these pitfalls can cost, again, hundreds of thousands, even millions of dollars. They're a real issue.
Great, thank you. Another question we have here. What is the biggest challenge that you face when trying to save money on cloud hosting?
I think the biggest challenge is just the overall complexity. So you have to be pretty well versed in where you're going to find. Kind of goes back to the other question that came up earlier, where you're going to find your biggest bang for the buck. This has been another kind of challenging thing that I've seen, and this one, it's a little trickier to deal with because a lot of the time, the engineering staff, they get excited. They want to work with something new and cool. They want to work with the latest technology, and this is just natural for engineers. I'm an engineer myself. I love working with new technology. It's great, but from an enterprise perspective, you have to be conscious of, if I do this particular thing in the cloud, is it really going to save me money? And it goes back to the planning. I know that planning isn't fun. It's boring. Nobody wants to sit there with a calculator and figure out what a number of EC2 instances are going to cost over the span of a few years. No one wants to consider what it's going to cost to get their data back out of the cloud. no one wants to consider, oh, I've got this application and it can't be migrated to the cloud because it has to speak to another service that's on premises. Like, all these questions are, they're technical minutiae, and they're not as fun as, working with the latest and greatest technology. But by addressing them, it's how you keep projects from going off the rails. It's how you save money, and probably most importantly, it's how you maximize the efficiency of your employees.
Great, thank you, John. Another question I have here is, what would be my very first steps if I want to save on cloud?
I think that question is kind of broad, and so what I would recommend is set up a meeting with us and zero in on what does your enterprise look like right now. It's not always as simple as like, hey, here's this magic bullet that can save you a pile of money. A lot of it is just having a phone call with an expert and figuring out where you are at in your technical journey at this moment. And again, this is what we do. It's our bread and butter. Just give us a ring.
Great. And the last one I have here, John, is, what is your favorite software for streamlining these processes?
I don't know that I have a favorite. I kind of focus, again, I as best I can, I really like to focus on which piece of software will work well for this customer. And I've been able to do that. I heard a beep, hoping it disconnected there. I think that I've been able to do that because, again, Alcor, we're software agnostic. So for instance, we had a customer come to us recently. They wanted to do Morpheus. Morpheus is it's a great product. It's fairly similar to some other CMPs that we've worked with. As mentioned, we're a Embotics partner as well. So it's great for me being able to go to a customer and say, okay, you want to use Morpheus, or you want to use Embotics, or you want to use CloudForms, whatever. Like, we will work with you, and we will get your input. We will, we'll definitely advise you. There are some situations where customers don't necessarily know what the best product is, but the great thing is we're not tied to a particular stack. So we're not going to tell you that product X is the end all be all, because generally it isn't. Except ServiceNow, that is the end all be all.
All right. Well, thank you so much for addressing all these questions. This is all I have for today. Our webinar's recording will be available on our website, www.alcortech.com. We will also send all participants and those who registered this recording via email. We really appreciate all of you for joining this webinar, and we will see you at our next one already in the next year, in 2020. Thank you, everyone, and thank you, of course, John, for this great presentation.
Thank you.